Good evening, good morning, good night, good afternoon, good dawn, whatever. Good things to potential listeners. Maybe we'll get to this time. This is another episode of the Symposium podcast in the Sorcerer's Crusade series. We are gathered here today to talk about a special person I'm going to introduce in a second. To help me with this, I have assembled my usual minions. I mean beloved crew members. I have Phil Bricato, award-winning writer, social activist, musician, uh, part-time popcorn popper at the local residence. I'm sure he does everything else. So what? And Victor Kinzer, who does tech stuff, and he writes for Storyteller's Vault, and he is a writer on upcoming Mave projects, which coming up from on its path. And finally, we have the guest of honor today because we've tried to staple her down, and finally we've accomplished this. Rachel, she has been a writer for many years, and she's helped with the M20 cookbook. She has helped on Sorcerer's Crusade, Orphan Survival Guide, and much more that I'm probably not aware of because I'm a doofus who rarely prepared for things. And then we have me, and I somehow got this podcast gig starting. We will not question the details of how this happened. I'm just saying bribes and blackmail might have been involved. I'm not confirming this. So anyway, I'm welcoming you all to the show as usual.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes. So I'm going to start because I've been given a strict command to not get into as many tangents as usual. we will fail inevitably, but we will have fewer tangents than usual, I hope. So Rachel, I will start by just asking you questions. What have you done? What did you do with Sorcerer's Crusade? What did you write on? What did you like about it? Tell us. Enlighten us all.
Well, I think I started in Sorcerer's Crusade with I think the first thing that I did with Sorcerer's Crusade was fiction for the book The Order of Reason. And actually, I've been going through and sort of reading through some of this. And sometimes you write things and you send them off into the world and, you hope that they're successful. And then you're kind of on to the next. And so it's kind of fun sometimes to go back through the old books and sort of read what you wrote. and there, having the perspective of, let's see, when was this book published? This book was published in 2001. So I've lived a lot of life since then, and a lot of profoundly powerful life since then, and it's kind of fun to go back and look at things that I've written, and go, golly, wow! For someone who didn't know a thing about anything, that's actually pretty good. So,
you've always been a really good writer.
Oh, thank you.
As someone who thinks The Order of Reason is the best Sorcerer's Crusade and Mage book, it shows you were good. Anyway.
I really, I have to give props to Brian, because Brian he really kind of got to the heart of what the Order of Reason was and how it started and how things started to kind of fall apart. The inherent corruption in some of the, that was kind of built into the mix of some of these groups. Whereas, you could see in people like the Cosians, for example, the eventual leap that they would take. And I think that in terms of books that I've used in gameplay, I think I used Order of Reason a lot more, and Swashbucklers, to be honest. I used those two in my own games far more than some of the other books, largely because there was just so much good stuff in there that that Brian put in there. And you know, just as a developer reading it, it was fun for me to read. And I think this was one of the first books that I developed by myself on this line once Phil stepped back. And, you know, I have to say, I was really proud of it. I was very proud of it. The other one was Witches and Pagans, which, you know, they're books that you're proud of, and then they're books that are your baby. And this book was my baby. And really up until the cookbook, that's really what this was. And I don't know, this was one of those books that kind of wrote itself. In that, you know, some books are a struggle. When you write, you really struggle to get things to happen, to get things to work, to get things to coalesce. And this book was just easy. My co-author, Rebecca Moss, you know, she and I both just found this book exceptionally easy to write. And, you know, we had a lot of fun pulling it together. We had a lot of fun developing the book. We had a lot of fun just thinking about like all the kinds of things that we could put in there. So yeah, that one essentially was my baby.
So for people who might not have read your baby, they've not had, yeah, see, I'm playfully moving the conversation along in that direction. Anyway, for people who have not read your baby, can you tell us some of the particular things in the book that you remember that you like, or the notable additions that you did with the book, just for potential listeners to learn and sell us a little bit on it?
Okay, well, essentially what this book was, it was, you know, first of all, I have to say that it is a fictional book. So what people may not know about me, I am a fully initiated 3rd degree priestess of Wicca in a traditional group. So, you know, I know of which I speak, first of all. So we even had it there in the special note, you know, this is fictional. This is based on witchcraft and paganism, and on what we knew about witchcraft and paganism at the time. Again, this was 2001, before a lot of material was available on the web. And I'll go into a little bit of the politics and history of Wicca, especially here in the United States, as regards the kind of mystique that surrounds it, and some of the erroneous thinking that we have learned that surrounds it. But at any rate, this book is designed to be sort of an account, you know, one person's account of the magical people that they encounter as they, you know, proceed in this sort of world of the Sorcerer's Crusade, and all of the things that they learn. So it's designed to be kind of like a grimoire or a book of shadows, if that's your preferred terminology. But yeah, so it goes through, and we have, you know, all kinds of things. You know, we've got you know, ancient lore, we've got spells, we've got, you know, all kinds of interesting things that correspond with the game system pretty well. So you're like, okay, if I want to cast a spell that does this, well, then what do I use? And you know, all that's in there.
Yeah, it's full of the things and the stuffs.
Yes, it's full of the things and the stuff, which is kind of, you know, yeah, I guess I'm not giving you very much information, but
but that's really as much information as you need. I don't need you to like list out this specific rote on page 54 of the chapter 11 or whatever. No. I just wanted you to tell us about the book, and I think I've read Witches and Pagans a long time ago. mind you.
Yeah.
I didn't get to reread it this time because reasons. Most of the reasons being I fell asleep on the floor. But we ignore that. Ignore that. Ignore that. Allegedly the floor anyway. Anyway, but I wanted just to refresh my memory. I seem to recall there are loads of weird things in there, cool things. There's no space butterfly, but the concept didn't exist at the time, so I will forgive the lack of space butterflies in the book.
I will tell you one of my favorite things in this book, and it came from a friend of mine whom I've sadly lost touch with over the years, but her name is Vanessa, and she gave me as a gift this wonderful piece of art that she created, which was entitled A Detailed Explanation of the Flight of Broomsticks. And it was amazing. It was just this amazing, almost scientific detailing of how a witch would actually get a broom to fly, using, magical principles and all of these things. And, that I kind of thought about that, and I took, and I took it and just kind of ran with all the lore and the stuff that we thought about it in terms of broom flight. So we looked at it in terms of okay, well, you just make the flying ointment and that's what you do. And then there's the whole, well, okay, not all members of the Order of Reason are terrible cross-burning people. And, they're actually interested in these things for scientific reasons. So, that was one of those things that we wrote in, and I actually enjoyed including that. So that's one little teaser from Witches and Pagans for people who haven't read it.
Cool.
That's actually, like, you bring up the Order of Reason being interested in these things for scientific reasons. When I first started reading Sorcerer's Crusade, prepping for my first Chronicle, it was sort of decided we were going to play it. I had looked at it years and years and years ago. I had the books. They were on my forever, like, I have to get through these lists. And then it's like, okay, I have to read because I have to run this Chronicle. One of the things I struggled with a little bit in the core book that the Order of Reason and Witches and Pagans and some of these other pieces fleshed out and made work for me is so many of the early, like, historic figures the Order of Reason is based off of were occultists. Mm-hmm. And so seeing those tidbits in the Order of Reason that, like, yeah, the traditions and the Daedalans didn't love each other, but they cooperated more than people think now. Yeah. And, like, the Order of Reason were interested in these things for scientific reasons. Like, that tied all that together for me.
I actually want to say that I think that the line interest in things for scientific reasons actually is one of the most defining lines for the Order of Reason, because in a lot of ways, what I view the more negative aspects of the technocracy is that in a lot of ways, they've kind of lost their luster and interest in things. They just do stuff. And I think that's very much on purpose when they're written in a more antagonistic light. I think that in M20, they're given a little more of that luster back. But still, it's very much the thing that they aren't interested because they know now. So they don't care. They're like, this is just a way, and we're going to do it. The only ones that kept that air of wanting to find stuff and learn more and see the universe are the Void Engineers, which is their defining characteristics.
Yeah, that element has definitely changed in Technocracy Reloaded, and where that book is going to be like Guide to the Technocracy was 20 years. 21 years ago.
It's going to revolutionize the way we view technocrats.
It's going to be revolutionary. It's going to be very controversial because some people are going to be like, I want my black hats and mirror shades, and other ones are going to go, oh, finally I can play these guys.
I'd like to be able to play these guys.
I would also like to be able to play these guys. Eyes to primal utility. I've been looking at the primal utility sphere for years.
I love it so much.
It's the best. It actually is my favorite sphere in all of Mage. Not even favorite variant. It's the best sphere because I think thematically is so great. It's an amazing sphere, an amazing design, and I never get to play with it because everyone was like, no, you can't take it because we're playing traditional mages, and I'm like, couldn't I play an orc? No, I'm like, damn it! In my world, orphans can learn primal utility and be shamans at the same time. Hypereconomics and shamanism. You saw it here first.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Anyway, we are back on. Sorry for interrupting you, Victor, but we're back. We are on M20, and there you've done some stuff there too. I think, Rachel.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yep. She worked
So-
on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So, you know, just in terms of other things in Mage that I've worked on, I've kind of lost the thread of the conversation.
No,
Sorry.
I just wanted to savor myself from getting scolded for tangents. So that's why I thought, okay, we're bringing it back to the Rachel territory because we're bringing the spotlight to you, and it's related to you, Victor, because you two worked on the Mage cookbook, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. All
we
three.
did.
Three of us did. Three of us did. Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
know that all of you have been in books and written things, and I'm sitting here as the outsider, just looking in, being like, I could help, and getting rejected and sent to the streets.
I won't lie. I still feel like I'm just starting this. I don't feel too much like an insider. The Mage Cookbook was exciting, but the whole process was a wild ride for me. So,
Well, do tell.
It's been a wild ride book.
Tell us
It
about the book.
was for multiple reasons. I mean, I haven't, you know, I hadn't written a full length kind of book like that for you know, the line for a while, and at the same time I was like finishing up a master's degree, and you know, so it's like I had all these other time obligations, and it's kind of like, okay, I just need to sit my butt in the chair and write the damn book. And once I started, it was easy, but you know, it fought me for a while, and you know, it kind of was a wild ride, but once it took off, and I'm very pleased with what we ended up with.
yeah.
But
Well,
may I ask favorite dress? Sorry.
oh no. So I was just gonna say, I remember early on when we started chatting, I had a pitch when Phil was originally going to write it, that I had given to him, and then things got reorganized. And I remember when I brought my pitch to you, and you were kind of talking about like the text fighting with you. And once we started like chatting and going back and forth, you know, some of those original ideas you folded into that introduction, and I spent the longest time like waiting for it to come out and read it. And I loved what you did with that opening and the character of Bernie and all the like crazy incoherent notes I sent you that I threw those things together in an afternoon. I'm amazed you were able to make sense of them.
Well, it just seemed like something so interesting to me that I was like, yes, okay, yes, this is what I can do with this. And once, you know, usually once I get the direction of where something is going, then I can pretty much see it through to the end. You know, once I have the general direction of a narrative or a story, or you know, it's like, this is the shape I want this thing to take, then I can just fill out the elements of the shape. But you know, before then I was like, what the hell even is this? You know, what is a mage? I mean, what the hell? So
That's the question I asked myself. I've only read one of the 20 cookbooks, and that was the werewolf cookbook. And I'm like, I'm not going to make these recipes most likely because I'm very weird when it comes to food. I will not go into detail about that here because I don't want to seem like a petulant 5-year-old to the world more than I already do. Viewers, I know what you think about me. Anyway,
Well, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So, please tell me, is it just recipes in this book, or because I hear about characters and things? Tell me about
there's
this
a meta
cookbook.
plot. There's a whole meta plot running through it.
There's it kind of starts with a character that I created for what's the name of that book? It was a fiction book.
Truth Beyond Paradox.
And I had written this story, and I had this character, and I wasn't quite ready to let him go because I felt like he, in that first story, his whole thing was to be kind of like the, okay, I am out of my element and I am dealing with people that I usually don't deal with, but I'm doing it for a greater good. And so that was kind of his arc in the story. But then I thought, well, what about, that experience that he had in that story would have been profound and life-changing, and what would this character have done afterwards? And when Victor had the idea of these kind of underground dinners, I thought, oh, okay, I'd always I based that character on a very dear friend of mine who is Irish, who grew up on a dairy farm, who loves to cook. And I said, what would he do? He's a world traveler. He enjoys going and meeting people and eating food and learning how to cook things. And I thought, yeah, okay. So that's his deal. This is about him in his work trying to track down these Nefandi cells and disrupt them. He meets all these cool people and cooks with them or eats food with them or encounters their culture, and he writes it down. And over time it's like, okay, I have all these collected things, what do I do with them? All right, well, I'll put them in this book and share them with people so that they can gain the benefit of these experiences that I've had. So that there is kind of a meta plot running through it, but not a major one. But I wanted to give each of the recipes some context that would at least be fun to read, even if you never decided to undertake the gargantuan task of making individual beef Wellingtons. My favorite recipe in the book, by the way.
Or that crazy vegan cheese, which I made 3 times until it was right. That was it. Vegan cheese can be done at home, but it is not an entry level recipe. It is a process.
It's okay. I just have to ask about the recipes. Is it just the traditions, or do we get to see are the Sisters of Hippolyta represented? Because
it's all the disparates, all the traditions, and all the conventions.
So what's a Void Engineer dish? I have to know.
So I have to thank my partner for the Void Engineer dish, because he told me this fantastic story. It is a true story. I forget which mission it was, but there was a mission, I want to say in the 60s, where they were doing their first experiment with this incredibly expensive program that NASA had undertaken to create space food that could go into space, that you could have longer trips with astronauts. And they had all this food there, and one of the astronauts had been like, I'm not eating nothing but that dehydrated BS. And so he snuck a corned beef sandwich in his spacesuit. He opened it up and went to eat it once they were in microgravity. And the problem with that is crumbs just like float. And everyone on the ground flipped out, and they were like, you put that away. You get those crumbs before they get into the instruments. Congress flipped out. They almost cut funding for the program because it was such an affront. And I went, okay, what would this be to the Void Engineers? Like, that's the front story. That's what someone on the street heard about Congress freaking out. But really, what kind of horrid paradox backlash would there have been to like this whole program? And this is how they like covered it. So I went, I have to make the best corned beef sandwich ever. I looked up, homemade not French dressing. Oh, my mind has gone blank on the dressing. It has chili sauce and mayonnaise and horseradish in it. It's a very traditional corned beef dressing, and like I fried up the corned beef and I figured out the best way to treat the bread. But the story, the flavor snippet in the front, is about this, like, don't let them tell you this was Congress getting pissed off. That ship almost blew up because corned beef sandwich, and that sandwich in real life is cast in resin. It is in an aerospace museum. And I did a whole thing in the story about it being captured, as a more precautionary move. So I love that whole tidbit. When he told me that story, I was like, I have to do this for the Void Engineers.
Wasn't that
This is
the statistically wasn't it the statistically inevitable corned beef sandwich? Wasn't
Yes,
that
that is what I
called?
named it. The statistically inevitable corned beef sandwich.
I'm going to have to use this. For one, I'm going to have to. I don't know what corned beef is because I live in Norway. We
Oh.
use those terms. That's fine.
Dude, you're missing out, man.
Oh, it's so good.
I've been to the United States. I've tasted American food. I regret that experience.
You ate the wrong American food.
You're
Then.
eating the wrong
Yeah.
American food,
That is,
man.
it's for the most part, like I did find some good American food, and that was Mexican food in a Mexican restaurant, but in LA. But and I just refused to eat anywhere else after that. I was just like, I'm just eating here every day because I'm a marked man. I've tried everything from junk food to proper food. I went to a farmer's market to eat proper food, and I just died. I was like, what is this? And I think I just think that the health standards and I'm giving America shade here. This might be new to you. I'm just giving America shade because I think that the people in charge of the standards for the ingredients, they don't have as stringent standards as we have over here. I'm
I
saying.
totally agree.
I totally agree, and it's not over there. It's anywhere outside these borders.
Right.
I had a work trip down to Mexico City last year, and everything I ate, the fast food, the airport food, everything I touched was just leagues better than what I could get in the U.S.
Absolutely.
It's everywhere.
I tried to eat French. Sorry.
Except England. English food is awful. Except for the Indian food. The English food is awful.
Okay, English food is awful. You have to eat, like, for one, you can't eat English food in London or anything like that. You can maybe eat it like out in the Midlands. I've heard it's better there. But like in England, you don't eat English food. You eat all the lands they colonized.
Yeah, that's the best Indian food in the world is in London. I mean that the Indian food there is awesome. The Chinese food there is awesome. I remember having some good food in Edinburgh, but man, the
that's
food
Scotland.
exactly. I've been to England several times, and the food is wretched. I love England, but the food's awful.
Very good English food. Oh my God, poor Phil. But okay, I'm glad to see that I'm glad to hear rather that all the conventions and traditions and disputes are represented. Because
I want to just add something real quickly before we move on past that one, because the orphan entry in there is the last collaboration that I had with my late girlfriend Coyote Ward. And it's Coyote Cannibal Stew, which was a dish that she would prepare because she had a fairly large extended family, and they were very she often referred to herself as the cannibal, and the cannibal entry in the Book of Secrets is inspired by some of our conversations along those lines, but she the exchange in there, the character in there, Ashpaw Ten Sticks, is a fictionalized, slightly exaggerated version of her. She actually was a great deal like that, but the exchange between the two characters in there was an exchange that she and I actually had while we were working on the thing, and the recipe is by her. So that was also something else notable about that book. It was kind of the last thing she created before the cancer took her in 2017. So I wanted to get the credit in there for her.
I do like when you bring her up, because it's very nice to hear all the tiny ways she and you have helped immortalize her after cancer, because just according to ancient Egyptian, the second death is when nobody remembers your name anymore. Now the name will live on forever in that book. Okay,
that was intentional. I was working, and Rochelle, and I want to get Rochelle back on the credit here, because Rochelle was the second largest creator on Mage 20. She had the second largest piece of it with the disc. And actually, Rochelle wrote about a half of the disparate section. but Coyote was diagnosed with her cancer while we were working on Mage 20, and I asked her permission if I could, kind of build her a. We didn't know for sure that it was terminal at that point, but I said, I'd like to, kind of build you something while you can still enjoy it. And she's like, yeah, that sounds awesome. So we worked her in there, throughout the line. For exactly that reason that you just said there. But anyway, I just wanted to mention her contribution to the book as well, and then
That's
move on from there.
That's awesome to hear. I'm sure nobody minds. I think it's a great thing that is mentioned. Now, you mentioned that you have had the second largest piece of the of M20, and you bought half the Disparate almost. Did you write the Sisters of Hippolyta? I have to know.
I don't remember.
That was Angeline McCoy.
Okay, yeah, I was like, I couldn't remember whether that was Jackie and Nikki or whether that was somebody else, but I don't remember writing that one.
Okay, because I was going to ask.
Okay. That one was Angeline McCoy who originally created them. As often as possible, I tried to get the original people for Mage 20, and that was Angels.
Okay, there's a reason I was going to ask for this, because I was going to ask Rachel this if that she was one help writing them, but I think that you two are enough of an authority of the subject that you may decide. Okay, I make no secret of this. I'm a gender, okay, and now I'm writing my bachelor's degree thing, and I'm writing. It's really a camouflage feminist rant where I'm going to go to town on male academia. If Mage was real, but pretend it's real. Could I use that to get honorary membership in the Sisters of Hippolyta? I just wanted to know if I'm good, because I'm going to go. I have so many complaints about academia, but I've heard this line too often because I study history, and it's too bad we didn't have any female historical authors on the list, the curriculum list. But we had to get all these important ones in there first. And I'm like, who decided who they were important? Old white men did, because really, the study of history is to study the effects at the time and later. And I think a lot of female authors were very successful at the time, in as far back as the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. They were just ignored later.
They don't have Christine de Pizan in the curriculum.
They have that in the specific courses that deal with women. I talked about Prasan with you, I think. I've read her. The Book of the City of Ladies is perhaps one of the. It's one of the earliest things you get to a proto-feministic manifesto. It's an amazing book. She backpedals at the end to, because if not, she wouldn't be able to get published. But beyond that, it's awesome. It's basically taking every gaslight. It describes gaslighting in detail. Before the term gaslighting ever exists, it describes how women are told that women are this and this and this, despite the fact that they, as women, know to the contrary that's not. And the effect of getting not only the people around you, but every supposedly wise person going on saying that, women are horrible and emotional and can't think and they're scourges and all that thing. And the effect that has on the mind. The book opens with that. It's as powerful of a critique of the patriarchy's indoctrination of everyone and the women specifically, and how it affects them, as I've ever seen. And I was just, why is this not on every list of when you're dealing with historical authors? Anyway, that's my rant.
That's totally Rochelle's department, because Rochelle's in academia.
That's what I'm studying at the moment is language attitudes and how things like we had this discussion of how one of the premier authors and thinkers in sociolinguistics right now is a guy named Dr. Suresh Kanagaraja, and he's, I believe, at Penn State, maybe? I don't know. I have to check and see where he's teaching these days. But his whole thing is that academia is set up, even the language of academia, the way we write our papers, the way that research is presented, you know, particularly when we're doing qualitative, you know, ethnographies of language and reporting qualitative means of research, the way that we are required to report that research, the conventions that exist in academia are ones that still favor very kind of positivist, quantitative, method, you know, hierarchies of knowledge that do not recognize the knowledge systems of women, that do not recognize the knowledge systems of people of color, that do not recognize the knowledge systems of poor people, of you know, you know, agender people, of you know, LGBTQ people. So, you know, it's interesting that you know, this, it is pervasive across academia, and it's even down to the language we use to establish these attitudes and ideas. So you're on the right track. I approve.
Here's the thing. I was going to list. I was going to turn that rant very cleverly towards you, Rachel, because you mentioned PhD and master's degrees and all the things. And I'm just going to ask, because based on what you told me, I already have an answer. But I'm just, for the people who don't necessarily understood that, you're my side. Humanities for the win. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm just saying, we combined, we have to do something. We have to team up, because I've been trying to we have to team up in many ways, but this way specifically, because I've been trying to lobby certain people, Phil, and very, very subtly, and by very subtly, I mean not subtly at all. I'm just saying, humanities technocrat group, we should make it happen, and I will lobby for that like it's nobody's business. And now I know I know you're my ally now, because you can't betray our people, the people in humanities. You have to stand with us on this.
Absolutely.
So we're just putting down not the ban hammer, because that's Phil, but we're putting down the gauntlets. We're throwing it down, Phil. I'm putting you on the spot here, very unprofessionally, but you know, I can never be accused of being professional. So getting past that, I'm sure you have a response to that at some point, but
it may or may not be one for public consumption.
Yeah, exactly. It may or may not be for public consumption, which is why I'm now going to very skillfully turn this around and go to a book, because we mentioned orphans at some point when we talked about
that I got attention on that one. But yeah, so go ahead.
Yes, Orphans Survival Guide. You contributed to this, and I think you probably brought a lot of interesting perspectives there, because as a woman of color, and as that there's a lot of stuff there for minority groups in Orphan Survival Guide. If I remember correctly, it's the book that sold me on Mage, by the way. I should tell both of you.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
So please tell us about that, Rachel. Please tell us about the orphans that we all love.
I loved this book, and part of the reason why I loved this book was because, you know, in terms of the fiction that I've written for Mage over the years, this was one of the stories, just the group of characters in the story that that I was able to tell in that book, just made me happy. And it was, I wrote it at a time when, you know, you didn't see women of color prominently featured in game books at all. You know, you really didn't. So one of the characters that I had in that, I deliberately designed her as, you know, an Indian American woman, meaning from the
actual India
/ Pakistan, you know, from that region of the world. And you know, that kind of led me to look at other ways in which I could feature people of color as mages in these situations, and as you know, powerful people in these situations. So, you know, yeah, there's that.
I think that's sorry, Phil.
Oh, just ironically, and this is why I laughed when you mentioned it. A few months ago, somebody who I think probably wasn't even born when that book was written, because it was written 21 years ago. Somebody flipped his shit. He had read Orphan Survival Guide recently, and he flipped his shit, calling it queerphobic, calling it racist, calling it edgelord bullshit. And
I remember this.
Victor remembers this one
Because
because you were
we
in that
talked about this on the
conversation.
Yeah, I
podcast.
remember who made those comments. I have had
no.
several engagements with that individual online.
But here's the thing.
I'm so glad that I stay. You know, one of the joys of being in the ivory tower is that it keeps you off the damn internet, and so
Yeah,
you're not in the Tweety sphere. You're not on the Facebooks. You're not just not in that to a point where you kind of, you know, are on a daily basis kind of seeing this stuff play out in real time. And so I'll read something, you know, when I do engage with the platform, I'll read something and Phil is like, oh my God, I can't believe people. I'm like, oh, now.
let me all tell you. Victor, I talk to Victor about things sometimes. Like occasionally, we communicate once every blue moon, Victor.
Yeah.
And the thing is, really, like, except when we are arguing about very, very minor details in Mage, like we did the other day, like quote unquote argue, we really have only one conversation, and that conversation is that fandoms suck. All of them suck. They are the worst. Fandoms, you love fans. Fandoms are the worst goddamn thing. And every fan group, like every discourse,
Well, and so as one thing that we do tend to talk about a lot, and I've seen this in multiple fandoms, the people that really go out and create something in the fandom, the like hardcore, you know, producers on YouTube talking about their shows, doing analysis, the people that get in and make World of Darkness podcasts, those people are by and large awesome. The people that make up the very tiny slice of a fan base that just have to make a lot of noise and that's all they do are generally the visible fandom. And that is the slice of every fan base that makes my brain melt without fail.
Did I tell you guys about it? I talked about someone who likes fan groups for some reason, is not in the Mage world at the moment, but I talked to him about Gods and Monsters. Because I was like, that book's going to come out and it's going to be one of the biggest, most important books in Mage. And he was like, oh yeah. And you know, he's not well off because American, because that's usually synonymous things. And he's like, oh, you know, I'm going to get that book. I'm like, yeah, okay, but I'm going to pay for it. I'm like, what? You have to pay for it.
Oh my God, was that the one that was that the one that led to the moderator posting on the Mage group about we are not going to talk about pirating on this group?
No, he wasn't. He doesn't. No, no, I don't engage that. But I was like, I was like, you can't do that. Like, I'm like, and it was like, okay, all right, fine. You know, it's like, and I was like, okay, you can't just take a piece of art. Like, you don't deserve it if you can't pay for it. It was like, that's elitist. I'm like, no, it's not like me saying that, oh, if you're poor, you can't have a coffee machine or something that's a utility thing. Okay, I'm not Fox News here, but this is okay. A role-playing book. As much as we all love role-playing games here, okay, you don't need that. You don't actually need that book. You can go an entire life without getting even a cool role-playing book as much as you would want it. You can live an entire fulfilled life without getting it, right? In the Western world, coffee is one of the drugs that the establishment is pushing into people, so that you're going to be addicted to it and buy loads of money and be able to function just because of coffee. But so that's why you kind of need a coffee maker or a washing machine. A washing machine is probably the most it's the biggest feminist invention ever. It's the liberator. Really, we should rename washing machines to great liberators, because washing clothes by hand takes forever and it's fairly pointless. It's liberated millions of women, because let's be honest, men did not wash clothes. Okay, let's not pretend here. It liberated millions of women around the world, letting them get education and work and all sorts of shit. So yeah. It's elitist to be like, oh yeah, if you're poor, you shouldn't have those. Why are you having a washing machine? Because I saw Fox News claim that once.
Yeah, they did it just
Oh,
like
God.
a week ago.
Yeah, I'm not talking like washing
Week
machines
ago
for like.
or so.
I'm not talking a dishwashing machine. To just be clear for people with language barriers, I'm talking about a washing machine for clothes. One of the most basic utilities you need to survive in a Western world with the kind of schedule we have here. And it was like it's elitist. Poor people should really have those or have.
Well, and I don't know about Europe, but I mean, in the States, if you're poor, there's a laundromat down the street
Yeah.
where you go and you feed it in quarters. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what I did until Wendy and I bought our house
Oh, yeah, it's normal
back
for
in
students.
'98. Was always using laundromats.
Most of my life has been using laundromats. The last few years, and if the last few years I lived in Bloomington, I was lucky enough to have a washing machine, but those are pretty limited times.
Yeah, but I'm just going to point out laundromats over time will cost you more than which is one of the
Oh,
other
yeah.
things.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
very
Oh,
expensive to
the
be
poor
poor.
tax. Oh God, the
Yeah.
poor
Yeah.
tax. We could
It's very
go
expensive
on and
to
on
be
about
poor.
that.
It's the fun paradox of being a poor person, which I don't know anything about except academically because I'm a privileged slot kid. But ignoring that part, because I wanted to defend young people. I wanted to defend the young people today and be like, okay, that 20-year-old hated orphan survivor
But
guide, which we're allegedly talking about. But I'm also a young slot person. I'm 22, but 20, whatever. I'm also a young slot person, but I loved it, and I didn't think it was any of those things because I have brain cells.
Well, this is one of the reasons that when we had the orphan survival guide up dispute on the mage group, I was like, so let me tell you about the neighborhood that I lived in before I started working for White Wolf. Let me tell you about the number of people who died in the neighborhood while I was living there. Tell you about the person in the building next door who was shot. The person who was beaten with a baseball bat downstairs from my apartment. Let me tell you about the brawls I got into. The drug dealer down the street who offered me a job because he felt sorry for me because I was poor. Um, I was like, dude, I don't know how old you are, the guy who wrote who wrote the thing about the orphan survival guide, but I'm like, at the time that book was written, yeah, okay, we did go a little bit extreme because it was the '90s, but I was like,
yeah.
so let me tell
At
you
least
about
they
the
had
crime
feet.
rates. Yeah, really. But I was like, let me tell you about the street crime rate in America in the '80s and '90s. Said it is a fraction now of what it was back then. I'm like,
But
you would have. I lived in cities, well, hell, Atlanta, where Rochelle and I lived during the '90s. I mean, the homicide rate there, what Rochelle was like, what 400, 500 people a year.
It was nuts.
Yeah. Well,
It,
and oh, go ahead.
well, getting into this and talking about issues of homicide and of poverty, and Atlanta, people like to talk about Atlanta as this wonderful, vibrant, modern, up and coming city. There is more income disparity in Atlanta than pretty much anywhere else in the nation. And I think that's why you have these things like such a high homicide. That's why you had such a high homicide rate in the 90s, because that was when that income disparity was kind of being solidified. And now, it's interesting because you hear it from people who come from outside of Atlanta when they comment on it. Like, there was a girl I was talking to who's from Dallas, and she said, I've seen more Maseratis here in Atlanta than I ever saw in my, wealthy enclave of Dallas where I grew up. And she said, and I think it's because the income disparity is so high that people have to kind of perform wealth for each other to show that, oh, I'm not one of those poor people down here. I'm actually one of the rich movers and shakers here in Atlanta, even though that Maserati might be like the one thing they have, and they're living in this broken down apartment and can't afford the rest of their bills and have to go to a laundromat to do their laundry. So
Yeah.
um,
There was as an example of that, and as an example of both the shitty neighborhood that I lived in, and this wasn't even the shitty neighborhood. When I was before I was working at White Wolf, I was working at a shoe store called Virginia's largest shoe store, Saxon Shoes, and shortly after I left to join the staff at White Wolf and moved to Atlanta because this was in Richmond, Virginia. one of my coworkers was shot and killed by two kids stealing a pair of sneakers. And that was a thing in the 90s, especially in the early 90s, because part of that performative for some people, especially young people, part of that performative wealth was the athletic shoes you were wearing. And
It still
people
is.
were
Yeah, it still
is it
is.
still? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, clothes. It starts with clothes, man. Like before the car, even clothes is where performative wealth starts. Like I know about this from the opposite way because okay, I'm gonna tell you something because he will probably never listen to this. My dad, my father, is what we politely term a gold digger, not like on purpose, but he is, and he lives with a like inconceivably wealthy woman down in England, man. Okay, and he since then, after having basically been broke most of his life and due to being very irresponsible, but whatever, and gambling a lot. Anyway, he has become the biggest, like, oh, look at this scarf. It costs this much. And I have found the most expensive wine ever, you know, because, like, old rich don't do that. They don't talk that
No,
way.
not
But
at all.
new rich are the worst because they do that. And basically, like cars like Maseratis and Bentleys and shit, it's the car for the new rich because they're
Yes.
like, we need to show our everyone who's come from money. They're like, you can say a lot about them, but they find that very, very, very tacky. So they don't do stuff as that as often. So that's a fun fact about the universe.
Yeah, Rochelle, you had, if I recall correctly, you wrote a lot of the material about the Hollow Ones in that book, right?
Um, in Orphans,
Yeah.
I wrote the one I think I found the chapter actually. I wrote the chapter on errants, so people who had been part of a tradition and then decided to drop out of it for various reasons. And yeah, I don't think I wrote a lot about the Hollow Ones. At least I don't remember.
Okay, I guess it was 21 years ago. So like,
Yeah, I know. It was a
Yeah,
lot.
I mean,
A
I
lot
mean,
of details to pull out of.
okay,
Just to say.
okay. I think we can forgive you, Phil, because you remember stuff from like Mage books on like the exact page and exact sidebar. Like, oh yeah, if you want this, look up. How do you do that? Page 54 point and halfway down the page, that section. You know, stuff like that. So it's okay that you slip up once or twice.
well, as Rochelle can attest, when you're developing the book, you read it a lot.
A lot.
When we're during the proofing process alone, I read a book from start to finish 4 to 6 times, and by that time you start to remember. You might not remember the exact page, but you remember the section that it's in, and just go, oh yeah, it's in that. Go over, check that. Yeah, it's page. I reach over to reach over to my bookshelf and go, yeah, it's right there at page something, because mentally I've still got a picture of where in the book that section is, because I've read the bloody thing so many times.
Okay, do you remember? I'm going to test you here because for my own amusement, because this is one of the things that made me laugh when I read M20. Do you remember where the unicycle stats are? Because the unicycle stats.
Oh yeah, it's in the vehicle. It's in the vehicle rules, chapter 9.
I was just gonna check because I remember seeing that. I'm like, okay, I love M20. I love the book. I love most of the stuff in it. I think it's maybe second to Sorcerer's Crusade and the best one overall because Order of Reason. I will be forever biased because Order of Reason. I will get back to that in a second. But the unicycle rules kind of broke me. I was like, okay, I think we have reached the point. Like we didn't need that.
Well, when you're especially when you're doing a book that after cuts was 500,000 fucking words long. When you're working on something that huge, you have to put jokes in there.
Of course, you need something, and the unicycle stats is a good joke to have in there. To be fair,
I mean, it's like the running. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think my favorite joke in M20 are the level descriptions for the hypertech ability,
Oh yeah.
but the unicycle was pretty good.
Oh, I have to. The unicycle one was great. I have to tell you something. Hypertech has caused me no end of arguments because some people are convinced that you can do stuff with hypertech, and I'm like, it's just to identify devices and maybe copy them, but like you can't just like do random stuff with it. Like you can do all sorts of things with hypertech without spheres involved. I'm like, that's been loads of pointless arguments I've had about that skill. As much as I like it, I blame you, Phil, for many
Tony,
hours. Then again, that's
Tony Stark built this in a cave with a handful of scraps. Well, I'm not Tony Stark.
Well, yeah,
Is that not like the perfect mage moment there?
It is the perfect mage moment. Yes, I love that moment.
It's the ultimate mage moment. It's the ultimate Son of Ether moment. I can just see like even like non-majors, but you can have like a non-majors who found like the Iron Man armor, but you can even have like the technocracy being like, Jar Vargo built it in a cave with scraps, and I feel like I'm not him because, and nor will anyone else be because Paradox destroyed him, removed him from existence, and he took over the world. Fun lore fact there. Anyway, so just for the people who don't know, the Orphan Survival Guide is the first book that I think really shows why orphans are the best thing in Mage, objectively, because objective exists in art, obviously. And it examines street culture.
I think one of the other things that I loved about that book was I think that of the different player classes in Mage, the orphans you have such a blank slate and such a broad playing field on which to build a character. And I think one of the things that I loved about writing that book was, particularly the section that I wrote dealing with, a character who had come from a tradition and she had been a member of this cabal. And when that or this group of mages that were essentially like, I think when I conceptualized that group, it was like, what if the mages were essentially the good guys, but were painted as the bad guys, so they're out, robbing businesses, being gangsters, and basically causing the technocrats no small amount of trouble. And of course that brands them in the media as being, these super international crime syndicate, so it was kind of fun to see, well, what happens when members of that group fall from grace and have to kind of continue going and continue with their, what do you do when you're the survivor of a group that basically crashed and burned, and now you're on the street, and you've gone from a position of extraordinary wealth and privilege and power and feeling invincible to, I'm down eating at the Majestic Diner, this horrible greasy spoon place where I can barely scrape enough money together to buy myself a damn cup of coffee. And I think that to me was something I enjoyed. It's like, well, okay, what advice would somebody like that have to offer to, a true, awakened orphan who's like, okay, I don't know what to do with this crap and it scares the bejesus out of me. It's like, okay, well, here you go. This is what you do and this is what you don't do. and that idea that there are mentors out there who might be a lot more genuine in just because they don't have the ulterior motive that, at the time we were writing that book, the meta plot was that, well, all these traditions, they're churning out mages because they've got this ulterior, this overarching ulterior motive, this war that they're fighting. And, what happens if you're just a mage and you're not in that? And you're just trying to avoid, getting swatted by either, the technocrats or Paradox. take your pick.
Well,
So about the Disparate Alliance.
About the Disparate Alliance, Disparate Alliance,
Yeah.
the best group in modern Mage. But I have to ask.
Rochelle is one of the creators of the Disparate Alliance too.
High five, Rachel. High five.
Well, and the thing I love about the Disparate Alliance and about orphans in general, and one thing that's always fascinated me is, so in the early books, especially the very, very early books, I remember there was a fiction piece. It may have even been in the first edition core book. Maybe not. It's been a long time since I've read those books, about someone's self-awakening and just introducing this idea of self-awakening. I think at that point it was connected to the Hollow Ones. That text may have even been before orphans were introduced as different from the Hollow Ones. And it was just, I'm living my life and I awaken. And then the alternative is I go through this complicated initiation. I really like the idea of humans with extraordinary potential caught in the tension between the war incidentally, and they're exposed to multiple paradigms. Right. And they aren't just like, I am a chaotic postmodern manifestation of belief. They, in their own way, synergize these different paradigms that they're exposed to, maybe because they're a custo, maybe because they're an extraordinary citizen, maybe they're just lucky/unlucky enough to be exposed to a number of mages for a period of time. And they awaken into something that grows out of that. I really like that idea. And I think orphans are a great avenue to explore that. And I love them being in the Disparate Alliance because it's, okay, we're willing to cooperate here, but kind of going our own way.
I wanted to ask, because that Orphan Survival Guide is practically painted the way I view Mage Society forever after that. That's the Order of Reason, the two books that have painted the way I view mages. I have to ask a question. I've been thinking this, and some people disagree. The traditions are elitist tricks.
Yeah.
I want this to be confirmed as canon, that the traditions are, because I was in an argument where someone was like, elitist traditions. They're not elitist except maybe the Order of Hermes. I'm like, all of them are. They're all elitist in a different way because they try to be like, we define what magic is. Like we are the animistic group, and we are the pagan group, and we are the high ritual group. All the other ones are not real. That's how I view them. That they're basically. Sorry.
I was just saying that's one of the things that Rochelle and I had talked about back in the 90s was, we being actual pagan people pagan people who have our own, our own take on things. That we were both kind of like, a lot of the people who are running around going, well, I'm this, well, I'm that, you have to be this too, are full of shit.
This brings me back to one of the first things that I mentioned when we started talking was, like I mentioned, in like the early 90s, I came into, I came into a group here in Atlanta that styled themselves as a, traditional Wiccan group. They didn't call themselves necessarily a coven. They called themselves a seminary for teaching, because their whole goal was, we're not about the business of having, this sort of closed, restrictive group. We want to teach people about these traditions, these mystical, spiritual traditions that we have, and send people out into the world to teach other people, so that, the stigma against, non-Christian conforming people or non, I call it the triumvirate, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, people who do not espouse to the major religions of the world, that they won't be seen as, weird or creepy or evil or scary. And that served a really great function. But what I realized, in the past 10 years, really, since a lot of material has been made available on the internet, I was, raised in these traditions thinking, oh, wow, this material that I'm receiving is coming down to me, through hundreds of years of people passing on these traditions. And You know,
Uh,
well, because that's what the elders told us. And then when I had the opportunity to become an elder myself and got access to the, you know, basically to the source material that they used to build our classes, I was like, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't come from here. This comes from Golden Dawn. Or this doesn't come from here. This comes from, you know, Hindu thought. This doesn't come from here. This comes from traditional, you know, yeah, traditional, you know, African cultures and the way that they structure their thoughts systems. And what I realized is that what I had been sold as, you know, this tradition going back thousands of years before Christianity was actually a cobbled together hodgepodge of culturally and spiritually appropriated stuff from everybody else. And it pissed me off. It made me so angry that I, you know, that I completely, I have not gone back to the Wiccan community since then, because it made me angry as a person of color, as someone who, you know, has been taught my entire life that traditions of Black people, of brown people, are somehow inferior and less than, you know, or less important or less, you know, worthy of elevation.
but then you
And
realize that the white man created everything. They are
I-
the inventor race. They are
I-
they are the inventor. They are the inventor race, and could have never done anything wrong. It's not like
Columbusing their way into dominance. Like
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
I was Wiccan all through high school and most of college, and you know, I was starting to redefine, you know, what did I believe a little bit, and then I remember I was at Borders and they had a copy of the Big Blue Equinox, which, if anyone doesn't know about the Big Blue Equinox, it was an Aleister Crowley text. I won't go into like the whole history of what the equinoxes were in the publication, but it includes a lot of his writing. And I went, I'm curious about this Crowley thing. And I picked it up and I read it. And I'm like, wait a second. Wait, what? And I like, it was very clear that these artifacts, and this text predates Wicca by a fair bit, Wicca as an official thing. And I got to the Gnostic Mass and I read it and I set it down and I went, no. I went out onto the internet and it only took a little bit of digging. And there was a photograph of Gardner's initiation into OTO. There's a photograph of it. It's there. You can see it. You can touch it. And I'm like, how is this not the common narrative about all of this? Like, this is nuts.
Before the internet, before we were able to share, you know, our lived experiences and our knowledge with each other, there was no way really of fact checking these people.
Yep.
They're really, I mean, that's really all it is. There was no way of fact checking these people, to the point where, you know, people thought, oh, well, I'm in the Gardnerian tradition and I'm in the Alexandrian tradition, and these traditions go, you know, stretch beyond Christianity. Bullshit. They don't. You know, it's like you were initiated into traditions that you then stole from and created something that basically aggrandized you. And
well,
it's
Oh,
very
go ahead.
strange. It's very strange. But I want to bring something up related to this, which is a bit different from the topic at hand, in the sense that, well, it's about the funny thing about history, religious history, is that today, like, let's call them New Age faiths, just to be like have a broad view, pagan and New Age faiths. People view them as, oh, they're just hippies, they live in communes, and they have long beard. They front. Here's the funny thing: I've read Augustine. Okay, back in the day, in the early day of Christianity, that's how everyone viewed Christianity. The Christians lived in fucking communes. Like the precursors to monasteries, they lived in communes, were hippies, and were getting the youth in.
It's almost like those things are connected to people that want to create a community outside of the mainstream, as opposed to any specific culture.
It's very strange. It's almost like that's the case. It's almost like that's the case. Because everyone today is polytheistic people. world they live in. Like, you know, they have those temples, you know, they don't go to a proper church. Back in the day, Christians were the way we view Mormons and Scientologists now. Like, Scientologists probably is the most fitting one.
Here's
no.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just there's a brief place where this ties in with the bullshit consolidation by right-wing Christians here in America. Is a few months ago there was some, I don't even remember which one because it's so hard to keep track of them, but it was some right-wing senator or something was quoting this excerpt from the Pauline letters as an excuse to cut food stamps and cut unemployment benefits. And he's like, it says in this passage, you know, if a man not work, let him not eat. So I looked it up. You know what it is in context? It's a section where Paul is writing about he and some of his other hippie friends were visiting one of those Christian communes there, and he even says, I'm paraphrasing obviously because I don't have the Bible in front of me right at the moment, but he says, you know, although we were entitled to host rights, we chose not to because we wanted to contribute to the people who were hosting us rather than depending on our hosts. We wanted to express our Christian love by helping them out. So if a man not work, let him not. Our slogan was, if a man not work, let him not eat.
There's a noticeable detail there that was missing from the original.
When you see it in context, both in the Bible and in terms of those Christian communes, what he was saying was, we're sharing our labor out of love for our fellow people, rather than expecting them to take care of us. We're working with them because we're all in this together. And that some fucking asshole right-wing senator shit turns that expression of generosity and love and fellowship into a reason to deny poor people the right to eat.
Yeah,
that's a perfect example of how these things get twisted.
It sums up Christianity in the perfect way, in my opinion. That sums up organized religion, because, like, ignoring the Old Testament, like, the Bible is pretty okay. It's pretty
part you read.
Yeah, exactly. I said if you ignore 70% of the book, if you ignore the Old Testament, and everyone ignores it anyway, except when you can demonize gay people.
Yeah.
That the one passage and the Ten Commandments, the only passages that matter. Beyond that, everything else you can just, like, everyone, like Christianity, like, I will give them credit for this. Like all the other religions are very good about being consistent about following the rules, or at least discussing the rules. They just ignore them.
Well, they don't. The thing is, they don't even just ignore them. They intentionally misconstrue them. They intentionally warp them and reshape them.
But there's so many rules in the Bible that Christians don't know is there, because they don't acknowledge that they are there. Like, there's tons of rules about what food you should eat, and like how you should eat it, and what kind of hairstyles you can have, and so on. Christians don't know those rules are there, because since Christianity was made into a thing, and they realized that we can have a pretty good big franchise here with merchandise, we have to market this properly. They just ignore the rules when it fit them. Oh, you can't eat pork. Well, we're going into Northern Europe. People eat pork there. Well, you can eat pork anyway. Ignore that. In France, they like to eat clams. Well, you can't really eat. Yeah, we can eat clams. Which is, by the way, the thing that comes after the gay people thing in Leviticus is about, like, you can't eat clams. Fun fact. Well,
and you've got a whole, like, a chapter and a half in Leviticus about how you take care of poor people. And how it is part of your duty as God's people to take care of the poor. You never hear these people talk about that. And before we get off on a whole Christian bashing thing, I want to say I know a lot of really cool Christians who are.
There's lots of cool Christians.
Those aren't the people who are in power, because power is not a thing that they seek. They live their faith in a good and constructive way. The people who are in power are just use Christianity as constant guillotine did as a tool of empire, rather than as a religious, or rather than as a spiritual path. And there, though I am not Christian myself and haven't been for a very long time, I respect the teachings of the Christ and the example of the Christ, and the Christian path as laid out in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It starts getting a little fuzzy in John, because that's where it starts being all about, believe in me because I'm God, as opposed to be a good person.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go off on a whole Christian bashing.
I think
ultimately
we
it's
can
about
all.
power, not about the
It's
creed.
yeah. It really is that, and there's many ways I think we can talk about it. It's not just about Christianity, and even the atheist community. I'm saying this like the atheist community was this paragon of things, but the atheist community, the internet atheist community, has become what they claim to hate. They have become the biggest right-wing shills there are, and I'm an atheist. Okay, I unfortunately don't have it in me to believe in things. Like, the closest I have to spiritual belief is that I believe that all fiction is real, because people have an emotional connection to it, so it becomes real in a sort of metaphysical way. But whatever, I can get into my Plato imitations later. But anyway, I'm just like the atheist community has become this right-wing shill because it's about power, and now they're like about, oh yeah, but white people and those feminists ruining everything.
To pull this way back to Mage, though, I just had this conversation with someone. I briefly did an interview on Mage the podcast about, what I'm releasing on the ST Vault, which of course I talked about in the last episode here. And I was asked about, why did I frame things the way I framed them? And I got, and why isn't there a big Nefandus in this thing? And, who is the enemy? And I really got into, this is Mage. You're possibly the enemy. Like, the enemy very likely lives in the mirror. Power is the enemy. Every time I hear someone talk about Mage and try to present, I so often hear the central theme is, and they'll list something that emerges from that theme. And I'm like, you can dig another layer down. It's fine. Like,
it's really, like everything in life, it's about power. Like, if I want to bring it back, it's the dichotomy of power, and the corruption of power, and the way power warps people, and the way people use it, and the way it affects the world around you in so many different ways, and examines it. And I want to bring us into that discussion, because I know that all of us we're very opinionated people here. You may have noticed this, like the 5 listeners we managed to keep. Like, real talk, we have more than 5 listeners, but I like to downplay it so that I can make people feel privileged and cool to listen to us, like they're listening to something forbidden. We are a counterculture podcast. But okay, here's the thing. There's been some recent events going on, and right here, I know that beyond being a writer, you've lived 20 years of life since you wrote the things.
Yes.
Actively back in the day. You still write the things now, but since you wrote the things, you've been living 20 years of life. And I presume activism has been part of that life at some point.
Yes.
Yes. I have gotten that impression based on conversation with you and conversation about you. And I want to bring us to this, because this is the reality war of Mage and the reality war we're living in. We're in the middle of a reality war. The great reality war of America. And I'm going to talk about it with the best example we can. Covington Catholic School. The teen incident. The MAGA teen incident, as I call it. I hear your side, but it's time. It's time we talk about it, because this is not the primary episode, so I'm not going to discuss the primaries this time, or maybe we will, because tangents are a thing. But the MAGA teens.
For people who haven't seen it, there was an interesting, I think it might still even be going on, a really strange debate going on my Facebook wall, involving me and one of the original creators of Mage. Because, and with him not really taking the side of the magazines, because that's not what he was doing, and he's very, very definitely anti-Trump, but he was arguing he was arguing in favor of, well, if we look at this in the context, and I'm like, if we look at this at the larger context, and he's doing the devil's advocate thing, and I'm like, so about this game that we created about reality wars, we're in the middle of one right in this discussion right now.
because just to give people who may have not seen this, because not everyone follows the news in the way we do, and I applaud you for that level of self-care. Okay, it starts. This is what I know, because okay, I hate American mainstream media so much. I will get to that. Okay, this is what I know, and I might be wrong because I didn't follow this as diligently as I maybe should have. Okay, the first thing starts. We see video leaked of these fucking MAGA kids. Okay, they're all decked out in MAGA gear, aka swastikas and clown hats. Really, it's just a MAGA cap, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Let's not pretend it isn't. Okay, they're all decked out, and they're going to go out and protest women's rights like the good Christian boys they are. And by that would mean abortion, which of course, is a horrible abomination. Except that the Bible condones it. Ignore that part. Ignore that part. And they're going to protest the rights of women because really it's about power, as we've mentioned, right? They're going to do that. And then that's all we see. We see a Native American man going up to these protesters, and these kids are mocking him, making fun of the way he chants, making fun of the drumming. They're dancing. They're dancing. Oh my God. It's not dancing because, oh, it's a cool drum. No, they're dancing to be dicks. And we get to this one kid, and they have this thing where, because everyone else walks aside from the guy because he's just walking there slowly, but he stands and he comes up with the drum, and you see this kid with the fucking worst fucking smirk you've ever seen. It's the douchiest smirk in the history of smirks, and everyone of course dumps on these kids because they're wearing MAGA hats, being religious and protesting women's rights. Which is 3 good reasons to call someone an asshole in that, and maybe not religious, but like 2 good reasons and a half. Let's put it that way. 2 good reasons and a half to call someone a dick. But then you see the mainstream media had to come and salvage this, because then it turned out that a hate group yelled at them a little bit before that, but then it's okay, and their kids didn't do anything wrong. But then it turns out that they harassed women before that. But we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. Allegedly harassed. It was them. Allegedly harassed.
Oh no, it's not. It's not allegedly. There's video. One of them took video.
Yeah, it's video. There's video. But many of them are like, yeah, but it may have been someone else. But it was them. It was them. And they were harassing women and raping. It's not rape if you don't enjoy it and stuff like that. Stuff of that line. They were that level. So it turned out that what we all saw was right to begin with, but because they're white teens and not of color, we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Can't judge people for what they're wearing. Like, I remember the Trayvon Martin case. I was like a teen at the time, but I remember it. He was like, the media made up on it. He was wearing a hoodie. Of course, Zimmerman thought he was a thug.
Wow. What kills me the most about all this, and I have to be honest, I have barely engaged. I have read a lot of other people's comments about this. I haven't engaged because I will piss people off. I will piss people off on a lot of different sides, and I don't have the bandwidth to fight this fight on Facebook. But the thing that pisses me off the most about this is I was raised with protest as like a primary form of the way you engage in the world, and civil disobedience as sacred and old. Yeah. My parents were hippies. And whenever I see, a situation where people get into protests and then lots of other people jump in when in theory, the purpose of a protest is to be seen. And whatever ideas you bring to the protest, you want them seen. They're going to be picked apart. Are they worth it or not? Are you in the right? You are intentionally exposing yourself. Whenever I see someone protest and then, oh, well, what I brought to light wasn't viewed kindly, and then suddenly it's like, you don't have a right to say that. I'm like, no, if you're going to go out and protest, you stand by your ideas or sit the fuck down.
Well, the thing is that the media has never before tried to ruin someone's life like this, okay? They are ruining these kids' lives. They're ruining their lives, and the kids, it's not like they went out to do a protest, which, as you pointed out, is all about making your ideas being seen. AKA, it's going on the internet these days. There is never going to be a protest, ever, that's not going to be filmed in some way. The revolution will be live. Mm-hmm. Okay, regardless of what that revolution is. People will film it, and people will identify you. like if you protest, especially in a country like the United States, you have to be prepared to be beaten up by police, unless you're a white person and you're protesting something right wing, because then you're going to be given hamburgers. But if you are not that, you're going to have to be prepared to be beaten by police, be fired, be given threats, being stalked, because you're going to be seen by not only the people who see the protest in person, but millions of people who will potentially see it. So don't come with the bullshit like, oh, you're ruining these kids and they're getting threats, and I'm like, someone came on my Facebook. I got loads of right-wing people on my Facebook like, why are you doubling down? It's proven they didn't do anything. I'm like, I didn't think they started beating people in the first place. They did stuff which was being disrespectful dicks and wearing MAGA hats. That's enough. I don't need anything more. I don't need anything else. And I'm getting to the reality war aspect of this, because we saw these two sides colliding. And then one side is trying to be like, but see, we got everything white this time. It's fine. It's fine that the kids didn't do anything and you're ruining their lives. And then we later found out that after the kids happened to be on the school trip to protest women's rights, by the way, that's what schools should do. You should definitely bring kids to do that. When I went on the school trip, church-backed,
tax-exempt, church-backed organizations. Yeah, that's another element to this whole thing.
Yeah, that's another element. But what we found out, and this gets reality war. This is a reality war on like a chess level here. It turns out that these kids are getting PR help from a PR company linked to Mitch McConnell, the turtle himself.
Yeah.
Right? Linked to him. And I seem to recall that there's like people in among his staff and Trump staff, the premier White House lawyer is from that school and stuff. So we have all come to the conclusion of this. By we all, I mean myself and Phil. We come to the conclusion that they are trying to make their own Parkland kids, because they noticed that the Parkland kids galvanized the country and were like amazing, and we need our own Justice League.
So the Parkland kids didn't have parents that spewed hate onto Twitter when someone said something not so kind about their kids. Like, the only thing more atrocious than what those kids were doing are the things I've seen out of that one main kid's mother. She has said some truly atrocious.
That was a fake profile. That was a fake profile.
Was it? It was a fake profile.
Okay. Talk about reality wars. That was a fake profile that came from our side.
Yeah, or potentially from.
Oh God, that makes me so angry.
Actually, it could actually be worse. It might be from our side. I don't know, but it might have been. But I've seen alt-righters do triple agent operations, where they make profiles that are fake profiles that will appear like they're from our side, but they're actually meant to be discovered to be fake, so that we will then lose credibility. I've seen that happen before.
Oh yeah,
that's happened before. 4chan. Sorry.
It's Rochelle.
Here's the thing. I've read like 3 or 4 academic articles over the past few months that essentially, through quantitative data are basically saying, you know what, 85% of the quote unquote people we interact with on the internet on a daily basis, particularly those that get into these kinds of antagonistic fights or fights that deal with issues of race or politics or gender or sexuality, that 95% of them are bots. just bots. Even. 85% of these are bots, and they're not actually real people. They are programmed algorithms that are designed by various and sundry actors to generate and foment this kind of discord and disunity amongst people who otherwise would find solidarity with one another in spite of their differences. And so again, that points to why I rarely engage with stuff on the internet. In the event of these kids, it says a lot that the same PR firm that represents Mitch McConnell also got behind these kids
immediately.
But you know, I don't necessarily see the whole issue as being a bad thing, because what we're seeing, you know, 20 years ago, people would have automatically just accepted the narrative. Oh, they weren't at fault. They were, you know, they were actually the victims here, and people would have gone ahead believing that message, and nobody would have said anything otherwise. The media would have taken that PR message and run with it. But the good thing now is that there are, you know, we are living in the panopticon, basically.
Mhm.
You know, we are in a voluntary panopticon, in that everything we do, you have to assume that you know, if something big happens, you have to assume that somebody is going to film it. I worked in a high school for 15 years. Anytime, you know, in the modern, you know, cell phone era, in anytime there was any kind of altercation between students, any kind of fight, altercation between teachers and students, anything of that kind, you can guarantee within seconds there were phones out and people were filming it. For whatever purposes, you never know, but you have to assume that, you know, somebody is filming that. And I think the good thing that came out of this is that there, you know, in spite of the money spent to try to buy these young men the benefit of the doubt, the only people who bought it were conservative media. Nobody else bought it. Everybody else was like, no, see, we have receipts over here that say otherwise. And we have multiple receipts over here that say otherwise. So y'all can take your sob story about I'm the real victim here and shove it.
But
I mean,
there were several conservatives bought into it, but I've also seen some, let's call it, we have seen some liberals who have also bought into it. But overall, I think you're right, which is why I think that's why I agree with you completely here. That's the good thing about today. Unlike a lot of people, I welcome the divisiveness of today. Like, people are like, oh, back in the day we were civil and we had unity. What you had was that the rich completely dominated publicly in every way. Now they just dominate 90% of it or 99% of it, and now the 1% of the discourse gets dragged. It's an actual war now, instead of we getting humanity, like, to quote Orwell, you know, a boot stomping on humanity's face over and over again. And speaking of stomping, speaking of bots, and speaking of reality wars, I think something like this might be in a certain upcoming book that one person here has been working on. Would you care to enlighten our potential listeners about this, Phil?
Is this the part where I mentioned the Book of the Fallen and the group in there called A Better Sandal?
Yeah, better sandal. Explain what is a better sandal to those who don't know.
So in the book, A Better Sandal is a play on words on a softer way to grind humanity's face into the dirt. And it's an organization backed by the Nefandi. It's not a bunch of Nefandi on the keyboards. They're just supplying the money, and basically what it is they have groups, you know, cells all over the world, where they go into places where people need work, and they offer huge amounts of money for you to sit on the computer and shit post.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you're shit posting for or what you're shit posting about. You get paid per hour for the amount of time that you shit post and stir up as much trouble as possible everywhere. Some of it's also like cold calling, you know, calling people, making scams and things like that, or calling people and you know, pretending to be debt collectors and things like that. And they're also contracted, where the money for this comes in is political groups contract them to attack their enemies. Corporations contract them to drum up business or to collect debts. And essentially what the employees, none of none of whom know that this is some sort of part of an actual reality war. The employees are just people who need work.
Yep.
And they're like, oh, I can get paid $20 an hour to sit, to channel my anger at being poor and being miserable at strangers on the internet. Sure, and of course you get paid bonuses if it trends, if it causes, if it goes like GamerGate or something like that, you get
I love
extra
Gamergate.
bonuses. And the thing is like. I'm like, I swear, there's groups actually like this.
Oh, there are.
Uh,
I mean,
Oh
wasn't one of
yeah.
the, it wasn't actually one of the most influential people in the 2016 election, a random Estonian kid who was like posting, like he was like thinking about like media platform level here. Like, despite being a random Estonian kid, had actually a lot of influence on the political conversation in the United States because he had like fake news websites and just posted random fucking articles. Just
yeah,
like
well,
mandatory.
and the whole, I mean, one of the most political on some levels, actually, helped get Trump into office. I don't think it got Trump into office, but it helped. Was a fight between a guy and his ex-girlfriend. It wasn't even a fight between them. It was a guy smearing his ex-girlfriend online, and it turned
Gamergate.
into something that's still fucking going on.
Gamergate is one of the worst things, and
Yeah,
it laid a lot of the foundation for
exactly.
the resurrection of the Nazis, as I call it, aka the alt right.
Yeah, there's a book, and I really want to give this book a shout out, and I also want to find out what Rochelle was saying a few minutes ago.
Sorry
Um,
again.
uh, but um, but there's a book I want to give a shout out to specifically about this by Gary Lockman called Dark Star Rising, which is about the fascist and occult the occult underpinnings of the fascist movement that the Trump campaign took advantage of slash was taken advantage of by. And Lockman is pretty much my favorite writer about this sort of thing, about the intersections between occult cultures and popular culture and politics. And it's I mean he chapter and verses this person, this group, this time, this quote, which showed up in this person's mouth, and you want to see how deep that fucking rabbit hole goes. And again, Lockman's very very good at citing his sources, and his books are very very readable. And I was reading it while working on Book of the Fallen, and it's just like, God, this is creeping me the fuck out. How real this stuff is. These weird, superheroic metaphors that we've been doing in Mage for 26 years now. How close it really is. And as Rochelle and Victor can attest, having also being Mage authors, we do put a lot of we make sure that it's fictional, but we do put a lot of real world subjects and real world principles, and sometimes frequently, especially these days, real world history into our fictions in Mage. And this is definitely one of those places. And Rochelle, you were saying something a few minutes ago uh, about tying into the. Do you remember what you were?
No, not at the top of my
Uh,
head, but I did want to mention something that you were talking about there, in that, again, a lot of this gives me hope, because 20 years ago this would have been just like dank conspiracy theory nonsense. Books
Yeah.
like that. Exposing these kinds of things, that would have been like, oh well, that's just that weirdo conspiracy theory nonsense. The world's not like that. Come on.
The world's not like
But
that.
now, but now we have but now we have ways of verifying this, of really getting at the lived and spoken experiences of all kinds of people, not just those who have been marginalized, but people who have been doing the marginalizing. They're out. If there's anything that's good that has come out of Agent Orange Chaos, it's that he has unleashed these people
Mhm.
who have been, kind of quietly plotting in the shadows, and in some ways in fear of the quote political correctness, which is just code for treating people like decent fucking human beings.
Mhm.
you know, that they've kind of been unleashed and been given permission to kind of say whatever the hell they want about people that they don't like, and people that they fear. There's a lot of fear in there.
Mhm.
A lot of collective consciousness fear that we have done some really shitty things to people over centuries that
Mhm.
we've had no consequence for up to this point. And those people are the people that we have abused, that we have killed, that we have marginalized, that we have brutalized, are now gaining in power, are now gaining voices, are now, you know, the balance is shifting, and we are fucking terrified that they are going to do the same shit to us that we did to them.
Not just
And
a
that's ultimately what is driving a lot of this, is that existential dread of, holy shit, the very people that I have been abusing and that people like me have been abusing across history are suddenly gaining some power and gaining the upper hand, and I better watch my fucking back, because get back is a bitch. You know?
Well, and
That's not to say that you know, the majority of those people who you know, whose history involves that kind of abuse and marginalization are out there thinking, yeah, or just, you know, sharpening the knives and saying, yeah, watch out, motherfucker, I'm coming for you. You know, but there are those people out there. And, you know, tying this into the whole, you know, Covington Catholic kids, there are bigots out there who happen to be Black. I mean, let's be real. There are people who are bigots. They are, you know, they have been recognized as hate groups, you know, in their own right. But just because there are bigots, you know, on quote unquote our side, which I don't claim these people, but, you know, just because there are bigots on the other side does not excuse your own bigotry. And
of course
just
not.
because that there are people out there who hate you just as much as you hate them does not mean that the vast majority of people aren't, you know, loving people and compassionate people and people who recognize, you know what, I am not, you know, this is not the time of my ancestors. And, you know, all I want is for all of us to have a place at the table, for all of us to have power, not for just a few people to have power and the others don't. You know, it's not a zero-sum game. And you know, the good thing that's come out of, you know, the like I agree with you. I welcome this conflict, because the conflict is a conversation. We've been saying for how many decades, we need to have a conversation about race. This is the conversation, and conversations are not always nice and civil and orderly and, you know,
But
what
pray tell, Mom.
they get ugly.
Pray tell, Mom, sir, aren't you sure that we indubitably should be talking in the right cadence and using the proper terms and
No.
be polite? No, of course not.
No.
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 Sometimes, as you so accurately pointed out, conversations sometimes get ugly. Sometimes you just need to smack people like. I don't like Bill Maher these days because like he's always been pretty fit.
Oh,
But now,
I have never liked him.
no, but I did like it when he had a little more of an ideological backbone. But now he's just Islamophobia and establishment. He's just a douche. I know, but I'm getting to. He made an excellent point one time, and it was that it's the duty of the left to drag the backwards half of the country kicking and screaming into the next century. And just sometimes the conversation has to be not be like, oh, but sir, let's look at both sides. Sometimes it has to be verbal slap in the face and be like, global warming is real. Okay? Verbal slap in the face. Rape culture is real. Just sometimes you just have to take off the silk gloves. And there's a lot of reasons why the whites fear the ones that they've oppressed, because historically, when they've been really horrible to people, the poor, the weak, those who have been disenfranchised have struck back. And there's always this famous Mark quote that I like: "We will not make excuses for the terror."
Nope.
You know, but
will not. But sorry for. I'm just going to very quickly finish my point for once and not ramble on for 5 hours. Very, very quickly. And like one of the most famous incidents in history was the last last Moorish uprising in Spain, when after the kingdom of Granada fell, after the death of Al-Andalus, okay, and the Muslim conquerors had been very nice to the Christians when they came in. Oh, no, Christians, Jews, fine, you
Just
know,
pay an extra tax.
just pay extra tax. But compared to being forcibly converted and beaten and being turned into second-class citizens, that's fine. Okay, but for the standards at the time, after Christianity redefined what religion and faith is, it's pretty okay.
Yeah.
And then the Christians rewarded them by taking their land, forcibly converting them, creating an entirely second class of citizens, new Christians, and making their lives hell, and going to outlaw their language, their clothing, their everything.
Spanish
and then,
Inquisition.
Spanish Inquisition was created to police the forcibly converted Jews and Moors. That was a big part of why it was created. And then they obviously rose up to fight, and they how much of this is accurate is of course debatable, because you have to paint the opposition as horrible monsters. That's propaganda 101. And they've been and they describe, they massacred Christians, they ripped out their hearts and stuff like that. So they fear the ones they've oppressed rising up, because some might be angry enough to strike back. I think today we don't have much of an issue with that, because most people just want a seat at the table now for everyone. But there is ample historical basis for the fear, and I think this and that fear is horrible. But I sort of paradoxically like that they're afraid, because I've been my favorite tweet I've been posting over and over is a guy posting after Joe Manchin lost, Trump was like, "You should have been nicer to his president," and someone replied, the one who beat him is coming for you, and he's going to break your back and drink your spinal fluid. And I was like, yes, that's what AOC is doing. We're coming for them. And we're going to drink their spinal fluids. Anyway, please take your thing, Victor.
So I have like 2 or 3 thoughts, and they go back a bit in what we were talking about, but to talk about the thing I was thinking about, Rochelle, when you were talking, is as horrible as the last 2.5 years have been, the one thing that has been fairly glorious is I have not had to have the we're post-racial conversation in these 2.5 years. No one brings that up anymore. They wouldn't dare.
No.
I've seen a few people do it, but it doesn't last long.
I mean, that dies in the water, and I brought this up in the Mage of the Podcast thing I did. I don't know if I'm going to hit a note for most of our listenership, but I'm a Steven Universe fan, and they just had basically what was originally planned as the series finale. And it centers around this whole toxic relationship. And there's this one moment where they're trying to fix it. And one of the characters says, but to fix it, we'd have to acknowledge it's broken. And I feel like as a society, as ugly and just shitty as this is the process of acknowledging it's broken. And it feels a lot like going through those steps in like therapy or in your life. At the very, very beginning of the last presidential election cycle, I got into it with someone on Facebook, and I realized very quickly I was in the wrong and why I was in the wrong. And it was systemic. I had been raised with this idea of debate. I was raised in a very academic family, and I'd started to realize there was something wrong with the way I used that, and I didn't understand it. And then I got into this conversation where it was very clear. It's like, oh, I approach everyone as equals.
No.
But that's impossible. Just from a traumatic standpoint, I can't be viewed as an equal. I can only be viewed in certain situations as having an unfair and violent advantage. And it sucked. The 2-3 weeks after that conversation were terrible. I'm happy to say at the end of that conversation, we ended up at a fairly peaceful, I acknowledged I screwed up place with the person I was exchanging with. But I completely reorganized the way I engaged with people after that. And that was only a month or so, maybe a few weeks, because that was just me. You spread that out to all of society, that's going to take, I don't know, a generation or more.
Yeah.
It it's gonna suck, but it needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most humbling lesson of all, is that everyone isn't an equal. This goes both ways. This goes with you and with other people. I'm not like, as much as I love to like talk about workers and like, labor uprising. Okay, I am a spoiled fucking brat. My experience with like this is only academic, and because my mother is from a working class family, and she is a labor, and she, like me, is a very big leftist and is a politician, has been working for workers his entire career, right? But that's all. Beyond that, I can't say anything. Like, my experience isn't worth squat. The only thing I can say, like the only time I can ever talk about workers with, like an American, for example, who knows way more about that than I do, is because of the massive propaganda going on where you're taught to hate unions and stuff like that. Where I can be like, oh, I'm an historian and I live in a land where unions are very common and very powerful because it helps the workers, and union busting is not a thing here, and so on. And I can talk about that, but I can never talk about with the same ethos about like, oh, this is the life of the working man. Like, I don't know shit. I'm a spoiled fucking brat. And that's important to realize, that I'm not an equal on every subject. I am, as much as I don't want to be an arrogant, talking over douchebag who babbles about my crazy opinions, in a lot of subjects, I am a goddamn ignoramus who really should just shut up. And it's important to realize that everyone in some fields, in a lot of fields, don't know shit, and we should all know that. Socrates finally got to me, like, and just learn that you don't know. There's so much I don't know shit about. So goddamn much.
On a related note, I want y'all to keep having a conversation, but I need to go because I've got house guests.
Yeah,
but it is wonderful talking with y'all. Please keep going. I mean, because a lot of the stuff that y'all are talking about are things that need to be said. Just I can't be here for it because I've got people in the house.
Sorry, that's no problem. I tried to think we should time it so we can leave just as Phil's in, but we're too much into it now. So forgive me.
You're talking about some really, really important things, and I'm really glad, especially to have Rochelle and Victor involved in the conversation, because talk about voices that usually get drowned out even by people on the quote unquote left. And
people of color and gay people.
Well, yeah, I've got to run. I would love maybe for a future meeting of us to talk more about how the social justice traditions in Mage 20, which Rochelle was a significant part of doing the Discord Alliance. But I can't at this point be part of that conversation because I've got people in the house. But it is great talking to you all.
Go take care of your guests.
Go take care of your guests. You have my full sympathies.
Have fun. I will listen to the rest later. And for anybody who's listening, thank you all for being there. And I'll talk to you later. Take care. Have a good one.
Okay.
Bye.
And I actually have to go soon too, but I did want to point out something that is important for people to understand. There are certain conversations that you may care about very deeply and be very invested in philosophically, but sometimes you just need to shut your mouth and have damn seat and listen to the people for whom that's a lived experience. I am not gonna lie. I am all about solidarity for workers and fairness, income fairness and equality and all of these things. But I'm, like you, I was raised in an upper middle class household. I have no idea what it means to be in a working class household. Something else that people may not be aware of is that even amongst, Black people and people of color, there is this thing called colorism that, as a light-skinned person, I have more privilege in society than my darker skinned brothers and sisters. And sometimes they have conversations that I care very, very, very much about, but I have a seat and close my mouth because that's not my conversation. Likewise, I have a strong sense of solidarity with Native American peoples, with all indigenous peoples on the earth, to be quite frank. But because I am not claimed by any particular tribe or nation, even though, you know, I have that solidarity with them, there are conversations where I just need to sit down and keep my mouth shut and let them do the talking. And that can be really, really, really
Really hard.
difficult for those of us on the left. And I think that that's an important lesson as well, that, you know, sometimes you just need to get out of the way. And sometimes it's enough to say that, yes, I agree with you. And yes, I support you. And yes, I will have your back in a fight. But this is not my conversation to have right now. So I'm gonna let you talk and have your conversation. And if I can contribute something to that conversation that is going to move the conversation ahead, that might present a perspective that is being ignored, then yes, I will most definitely chime in and say something. But if I'm just, if what I'm going to say is going to appropriate that conversation and turn it back towards a lens of privileged people, then I don't need to be talking in that moment. And I think that, you know, it's really hard sometimes for those of us who have the privilege of a platform, who have these feelings of needing to promote these voices, that sometimes, you know, it's like we have to give that caveat that it's like, yes, I'm trying to raise awareness here, but if there is somebody else who can say what I'm saying from a perspective of lived experience that I don't have, then by all means come in and say it better than I did, because I'm just trying to raise the awareness here. Like, you know, I recently wrote some things for a vampire book, actually. The Chicago Onyx Path published the Chicago Chronicles, and we were really damn proud of that book because we made sure that there were authors of color, that there were queer authors, that there were that we were representing people who had been left out of the official history of Chicago. For example, you know, a large part of what I wrote was dealing with the Native American history of that region. You know, I am not a member of those tribes or nations, but I'm a person of color who has that platform. And if I can say, hey, these people were here and these people are still here, even though, you know, they've kind of been erased by, you know, the settler culture that came to live in that place, they're still there and they're still valid, and you are on stolen land. And, you know, part of the fictional narrative that I created was, yeah, they remember, they're well aware you're on stolen land, and they're just biding their time until they can take it back from you know, these
Well,
vampires who claim to own this place. Yeah, you thought.
I hope that's the case. I personally am sitting waiting for the uprising. You know, but I think what you said was really important. And we have actually three different voices here. We have people of color. We have we have a gay man. We have me, who is agender and neurodivergent. I'm autistic, so I have the neurodivergent perspective to bring. But because white skin and everything, and male seeming, I get away with a lot of stuff. Because that's.
But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there before I had to go, but I do have to leave. And folks who are
I think
listening,
that's great. This to be continued. To be continued.
A lot, but
to be continued. We're going to have to make a part 2 of this, sometimes very soon, because there's so much that needs to be brought up. There's so many anecdotes, so many things, and as much as I think me and Victor could make an entertaining duo by ourselves, I think it would be natural to end it here.
Yes, I actually do need to get going soon as well. Anyway, so it would be a short wrap up.
It would be a short wrap up. I think we'll continue this. Thank you, anyone who's managed to listen to this. Next time, it's going to be more queer. It's going to be more lefty. It's going to be more angry. And that, I think, is as good a sale as anything. Thank you, everyone.